All right, we're going to get started. Thank you all for coming out tonight. Before we start announcements, we are doing a raffle for a couple of gift cards, North Haven Gardens, and a bag of potting soil. If you haven't yet put your name in the little pot, we are going to draw those at the end of announcements in just a few minutes. So if you haven't done that, go ahead and run over. You don't pay. There's just a drawing, free drawing. I'm sorry, just free drawing. No money involved. Giveaway. So, all right. And so we just have a few announcements. We still need volunteers. If anyone is interested in a couple of the positions, we need an events and outreach person to coordinate our outreach events, find volunteers to help staff the events. If you want to actually be the person that goes out to talk to the public about native plants and about what we do, we are looking for you. If you've already taken the NLCP classes, levels 1 through 4, you're eligible to become an NLCP instructor with NPSOT. So we need people to help teach the online portions of the class and also to lead the plant walks that are the second day portion of the NLCP. So if you know that, you are familiar with them. If you haven't taken NLCP, go ahead and sign up. We do have our level 1 class on April 20th and 21st. The links are on the website. So if you haven't signed up, go ahead and do that. Let's see.
Are we looking to do other levels? I know that we always do one a couple times a year.
Yes, we do 1, and then occasionally we'll do levels like 2 or 3 and 4. Like 4 usually occurs over the winter.
Now, right?
Yeah, it's on the main NPSOT website, so just go on there.
So May 4th, May the 4th be with you. We will be having, I'm trying to see if we can get Obi-Wan Kenobia as one of our plants. That could be fun for a little Star Wars theme. We have our plant sale at the bathhouse. It's for Native Plants and Prairie Day. We need you to pot up your volunteers. We also need volunteers for the day of the sale. There's a sign up over there, and I'll pass this one around as well. And then if anybody is interested in being a plant sitter, we're going to be getting some plants from some different places, as well as I'm running out of space to continue keeping all of these plants. You will get a handy dandy plant tent to protect, so this comes undone. But you get a little plant tent, as many as you have room for to protect the plants, and you need to water them once a week and bring them to the sale. But that will help us have more plants. In the fall, we sold out in Cindy, an hour and a half, I think. We sold out very quickly. So we are trying to have a lot more plants in the spring, as well as have a wide variety. Some of those things that are hard to get, people are excited to have.
So when are you getting the plants for plant sitting?
So it depends. So email me or talk to me and we can figure out what time works. I have plants now that are ready to go. We'll be getting some plants in April from Barbara Wright's nursery. So we'll have, I think we brought about 250 back. We're probably going to bring a few more.
4-inch?
It'll be a combination of 4-inch, gallons, quarts.
Okay.
Katie, I might need you to advance. Oh, I didn't turn it back on. I left it on since the last meeting, so I've been trying to turn it off. All right, so plants for the plant sale, they all need to be 100% native. They need to be in good shape. If it has an ugly leaf or something, just cut that off. Make sure that they're potted up no later than March 30th, ideally March 22nd, so this weekend, so they have enough time to recover. ID those plants. with the common name and the scientific name. We'll also have popsicle sticks. If you fill out the survey of what you're bringing, either on paper or there's a QR code for the survey, it also went out in the newsletter. We can also prepare those labels for you and then drop them off for the morning of the plant sale. We'll also be reimbursing for potting soil. So if you had fun like I did this weekend and potted up like 200 plants and you had to buy a bunch of potting soil to do it, we will reimburse for that. So you can bring in your receipt next meeting and we will reimburse for that. Because that was one of the pieces of feedback we got last time. Like, I love to provide plants, but potting soil can be expensive. Volunteers for the sale. We need people to help set up, people to help people find the plants that they're looking for. We also need some cashiers and people to help with breaking down the sale, which will either be 4 p.m. or if we sell out, we'll let you know you don't need to help with breakdown. And some of the people that we're helping during the day will help with that. We have a sign up over here and I'll be sending that around as well. And then plant centers. So I think if it's a bunch of 4-inch pots in like a tent that size, we can fit about 50 plants. It'll depend on the sizes. Email me at emily.black@NPSOT and we can chat, figure out your sun, shade situation, what works, and then I will deliver some plants to you. Yes.
Are they priced according to the size or the rarity?
So they have historically been priced according to the size. If there's some very special plants, we may like, I know the herd for milkweed, they're a different price. If there's some very hard to find plants, we may have a different pricing scheme for those. But we haven't done that historically. Have we? Do you have some?
Yeah, I have maybe. Yeah. And it's popping up.
What is this?
Here. Leather leaf, bellflower.
That's so hard to get to germinate.
I know, and I've got it everywhere.
Do share. Do share.
Yeah.
Other questions about the plant sale? Katie, turn it over to you. I think we talked about NLCP. We mentioned this last time. There's the DFW City Nature Challenge that is at the end of April. So anything on iNaturalist that you photograph will go towards the Nature Challenge. And we've historically been one of the highest ranking cities. So we're trying to win that again. And then 2 cool plant walks. I know this is a little bit further away, but really cool plant walk at Big Thicket for carnivorous plants. And then there's also a solar eclipse viewing at Indigo Hills. So that sign up is not yet available. It is from the NPAT website, but that should be.
I think we might be having it at John Wilkes Prairie. So we haven't, I don't know, I think the state website hasn't updated.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
So there will be an eclipse viewing party with NPAT somewhere.
Yes. Multiple locations.
All right. And this
So will those
is
be put on the website so that if that one does pop up, we do know, and these will be outside, right? Or like,
yeah, we can put them on the website.
okay.
Yeah, they'll be up there.
All right, and we are back to the beginning because it loops.
That's great.
This is yours. Here's the ball.
Yeah, please be sure if y'all are interested in the plant sale, donating plants or volunteering, please sign up. The links are on the website and they went out in the newsletter, and we have sheets here in person. And if you don't sign up, you know, please do sign up so that we know to anticipate for soil reimbursement and all that costs. So go ahead and do it. We would really appreciate it. Thank you. Without further ado, let me go ahead and, yes, I forgot.
This is my 4.
Okay.
Yes.
So the first first person's name.
And you get to choose. Martha?
Martha?
You had me in one. She wanted me to take her out, but I couldn't find her.
Oh, there you go. I found her. Okay. Okay, Bet Campbell, you are the first winner. You get first pick.
Do you want soil or gift card?
Say again?
Soil or gift card?
Gift card.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, 2 more to go. Adrian Cortez. Yep. Soil or gift card?
Gift card, please.
All right. Last name, who is the winner? Ruth Hughes.
Gift card.
Only had 2. All right, thank you guys. All right, I almost forgot. Let me introduce our speaker for this evening. Dusty Rhoads is a writer, biologist, and environmental restorationist. For the past 2 years, he's worked for Native American Seed. He is the co-creator of Rehorning Texas, a consulting business that helps landowners restore Texas horned lizards and their habitat. Dusty is also a founding board member of the Texas Lobo Coalition, an organization that seeks to restore wild wolves to the Texas landscape. Please give a round of applause to Dusty.
Well, thank you.
Oh, sorry.
There you go. All right, so yeah, we'll be talking about how we can use native plants to restore habitat and hopefully populations of the state reptile, Texas horned lizards. And I just wanted to start off with a question, first of all. Anybody know who painted this illustration here? Audubon. Yeah, I heard several people say Audubon. That's correct, yes. And I chose this as the introductory slide because Audubon visited Texas in 1837. And this was about 6 months after Charles Darwin got back from his Beagle voyage, and he set off on a voyage on his own from New Orleans to Galveston. And I was born and raised in Galveston County, close to where he stepped off the boat there, and met the Texas Navy commander, not Navy commander, but Captain Samuel Rhoads Fisher, who's no relation to me, I don't think. But in this painting is some familiar stuff where I grew up, seeing crawdad chimneys, the white heron or great egret, which ended up being the logo of the Audubon Society. And there's some other things in there maybe a little bit less familiar. You've got some prairie grasses, it could be eastern gamma grass, who knows. And he talked about in his book that came out in 1840, seeing these birds in Charleston, South Carolina, and in Galveston. And then he inserts this horned lizard down there in the bottom left-hand corner. And this was a fairly unfamiliar sight for me growing up in this area. Because I was born there in 1980. I never saw one of these until I was 27 years old, in 2007. And I was, since I see this illustration, I wondered why he put that in there, because I don't think he was in the habit of putting things from different biogeographic regions completely in this picture. I think it's possible that he probably saw horned lizards. I've looked through his journals, and I haven't seen, and his letters to his wife back then, I didn't see anything that said he explicitly saw horned lizards in Texas, but he probably did, because he was here from late April to about late May of 1837. He met Sam Houston and was here for about 3 or 4 weeks, and then went back. But they would have been common. They were common up until about the time, just a few years before I was born, in Galveston County. And the first, this is on.
Okay, let's see.
Did I do that?
I think I did, but I think if we can get the cursor back to where it needs to be, it should stick. Some of the time, if I touch my mouse, it creates issues. Okay, so I think you should go ahead.
It should work now.
I hope so.
So, but the first horned lizards I saw were in movies, and a lot of you probably recognize this movie, Old Yeller, and I just got really excited when I saw this movie come on Disney Channel back in the day. Yeah, this is not flipping forward there, because this kid, one of the protagonists or tritagonists rather, he was catching horned lizards in his yard, and for somebody like me who was born loving reptiles and catching what I could find in my yard, Gulf Coast toads, rough earth snakes, and green and old lizards, this just seemed like really exotic fare to find a horned lizard in your yard. And he was finding other things too, and I just wanted to be this kid, really. Still not clicking. Test it, or? There we go. No?
Here, shoot it at this. Aim at it. Well, I can
I might have to
just press forward.
Yeah. Okay, that's
There you go.
That's me. Okay.
Yay.
And so, right before this movie came out, allegedly, legend has it that Walt Disney himself came to Texas. Now, this might be just a Disney legend, but it's on the theater where this private premiere for Old Yeller was in Mason, Texas, at the Odeon Theater, which is one of the oldest movie theaters in Texas. And just this little personal note here, this is my best friend from graduate school at TCU, and we went and studied horned lizards together. He's got a little baby horned lizard in his hand down there at the Chaparral Wildlife Management area. Anyway, as I was researching this story because of the horned lizard connection, I was finding some newspaper articles online about the premiere, and his grandmother was one of the kids who got to attend this private premiere. So it's just one of those instances of anytime you study something, you find that the entire universe is connected to it. But just 10 years after Walt Disney allegedly came to Texas, the state of Texas, I don't know if you can see this, but these are a couple of articles in the Senate Journal and another Texas newspaper mentioning how the Texas horned lizard became protected. It was state threatened in 1967. So not even 10 years after that movie came out, when it was so common for kids back then to find horned lizards in their yard, they were now listed as protected in the state. And it was actually just protected from only commercial collecting, not from habitat destruction or populations being destroyed by bulldozers or anything like that. So the story that you often hear about what happened to horned lizards, well, you hear several stories. You hear about fire ants, you hear about kids collecting them and selling them and so forth. And a lot of that is true, and I think there's a lot of that comes into play. As you can see, these little ads here that were in newspapers, horned toads, all wanted ads, paying 10 cents a piece and selling them for 90 cents. And this is a National Scout Jamboree photo from 1950, and there's the boy on the left there has a horned lizard in his hand, and they would trade them at scouting events and selling them like they would do selling soda pop bottles that they would find to local gas stations and so forth. But I think the story is a lot bigger than that. I think it goes back a lot further than people selling them and commodifying them and so forth. And I think it goes back at least a couple hundred years ago with European settlement, with the great plow up back in the little house on the prairie days of breaking the plow that broke the prairie, and just in general, the annihilation of the American Serengeti animals that were here. And in truth, the historic habitat of Texas horned lizards, the cradle of their existence was this American Serengeti. And you had, the earliest explorers, Lewis and Clark, others, they were utterly just gobsmacked at what they saw. It looked like a safari. I mean, you could see from one horizon to the other, thousands of bison flanked by, wolves on their heels, sometimes, several dozen wolves in one view, pronghorn antelope, prairie dogs, all of that kind of stuff. And that was the community that horned lizards existed in. And just 10,000 years before that, there were a lot of other megafauna as well, like mammoths and so forth. And I think the open range movements, the migratory patterns of bison and pronghorn and other species allowed for the ecology of horned lizards and their dispersal patterns, because they, buffalo traces or bison traces and other game traces basically were these mowed, grazed down areas, and small ectotherms and smaller species like roadrunners and quails and so forth would be able to get around on those bare areas and bask and so forth, and I think even expanded their range further back then because of that. And if you look at some of the old notes of when those first horned lizards were found in the 1804 through 1820 or so by Lewis and Clark and Zebulon Pike of Pike's Peak fame, and the Stephen Long expedition of 1820, when you have, this is an illustration by Titian Ramsey Peale. His father had started the first natural history museum in Philadelphia, in the country, and some would argue in the world it's the first of its kind. But this is a sketch that he made on the same afternoon in July, I think, of 1820 in southeastern Colorado, of horned lizards and prairie dogs together. And almost all of those guys, actually all of those guys, saw horned lizards together with prairie dogs. The very first one that they sent back east to Thomas Jefferson from the Lewis and Clark expedition came from a prairie dog town. And so, getting back into what happened to the horned lizard. Well, what else happened besides this notion that little kids were just selling them off and they needed to put a stop to it? Well, like I said, the destruction of a lot of the wildness throughout the Great Plains, and federal agents. There was a big campaign at the time, in the first 40 or so years of the 1900s, from the USDA to administer to spread out pamphlets into extension offices and feed stores and so forth that would tell people basically how to kill off wild animals. And this one right here says by Vernon Bailey, directions for the destruction of wolves and coyotes. And this is one that you can buy for 5 cents. There are others as well. And there were people who I think we revere nowadays, like Aldo Leopold and others, who were also part of this and were paid to kill wild animals on the Great Plains. And so these are other pamphlets from that same USDA biological circulars. You've got ones for killing prairie dogs and other rodent pests of the farm, so-called, and another one that's called pocket gophers as enemies of trees. And all of these are ecosystem engineers, and they create habitat in this community of prairie species. And so it was just all-out war on them. And you can see basically what happened if you're looking at these numbers of these different keystone species. You've got bison at the top. This is essentially on the left-hand column, you've got a year, like 1800, 1820, beginning of the 1800s to about 1880 or 1900 or so on the right-hand column over there. And what their population was at the beginning, and then where it was about just 80 or so years later. So bison, there were 27 to 30 million wild, free-ranging bison around 1800. By 1884, there were less than 1,000. And there, of those, about 5 million were in Texas. And then there were, I think, 4 or 5 around the time that this happened at the Charles Goodnight rescue. Pronghorn, same kind of story, 15 million down to 13,000. Prairie dogs down to about a 20th of their original numbers, and now I think they're about hovering around 1% of what their original numbers were before settlement. Elk, wild horses, wolves basically went down to 0. And there used to be grizzlies. There was a grizzly in Texas around the year 1900, the last one known that was killed in the Davis Mountains and Olympia Canyon. But they were in the short grass and mid grass parts of the prairie. The only one that really was an exception was coyotes, because when we killed off the wolves, that was their main enemy, and so they were able to expand back out over the entire U.S. and not just from the Great Plains on the west coast. And also, the suppression of wildfires, which have been a part of Native American communities for hundreds of years, maybe thousands, that they use for food, ecological purposes, and so forth. And suppressing those is not good if it's a grassland, because grasslands need fires, especially the taller the grass it gets, the more frequent fires you need. And it also promotes biodiversity, because fires don't burn in geometric plane shapes. They burn a little haphazard ribbons and so forth, and so you've got a mosaic of habitat types that can come up in one place theoretically. And then of course just the introduction of domestic livestock. So I think the historic habitat of Horny Toads was wild bovines, wild canines, and wild perennial grasses. And then essentially it went from that to domesticated cows, domesticated dogs, and domesticated annual grasses like corn and wheat. And so it was a complete regime shakeup for the landscape ecology of a Texas horny toad. And this is a pretty interesting map from a book called The Texas Landscape Project that highlights this fact in a very interesting way. It shows the number of registered cattle brands per county in the year 1865 in South Texas. And you can see in Bexar County and Medina County, there were quite a few hundred already by this point. And so that would have been a lot of continuous grazing, overgrazing, I'm sure, and compared to historical grazing patterns of wild bovines. And this would have grazed out a lot of forbs and grasses, I'm sure. And then the introduction of exotic grasses obviously came into play. So this was a couple clippings here from a couple of different Texas newspapers in 1949 and 1950. And the one on the left shows this new device to pull around behind a tractor that plants Bermuda grass sprigs at a rate of 2 acres per hour. And the Bermuda grass was selling out which is a grass from Africa, was selling out by that next year in 1950. On the article on the right there. And this is another map from that same book I mentioned a minute ago, the Texas Landscape Project. But it's just showing the introduction of non-native grasses into Texas from other parts and what year they came and where they came from. A lot of them came from Africa and Asia, Old World. And there was an entire office that the USDA had set apart to bring this into effect, and it was called the Office of Foreign Seed and Plant Introduction. And yeah, and so many hundreds, maybe thousands of different kinds of exotic plants are brought in at this time, in large part in response to a major drought that the U.S. had experienced in the 1890s. And so they wanted to bring in grasses that they thought would improve the situation. And red imported fire ants, I mentioned those earlier. They first entered into Texas in around 1950s, 1958. I think the first records over there in the piney woods or the coastal region over there, the big thicket area. But they had come over only 20 years before when they entered in the U.S. around Mobile, Alabama. E.O. Wilson, who I'm sure you all are familiar with. He was a teenager, I think, when he wrote one of his first papers on fire ants. He was living in Mobile. And of course, this map only shows to 2013, but essentially they're everywhere now except for the Panhandle and the Trans-Pecos. And I've been bit by fire ants in Sanderson, Texas, which is in the Trans-Pecos. So they are creeping into places that seem inhospitable to them. And also, just in response to these fire ants, which were causing all kinds of problems for hunters, farmers, so forth, the USDA spent hundreds of millions on spraying a ant killer called Myrex, which actually means ant killer, from airplanes in the 60s and 70s. And it was, it didn't do anything to the fire ants, obviously, but it killed off, allegedly, a lot of the harvester ant populations, a lot of the other native ants. It killed termites, it killed all sorts of things. And some people likened it to, some environmentalists got involved and they were like, this is like essentially trying to cut your head off to cure a cold, because it was such a potent insecticide. And then just development in general. On the right over here is some aerial, some time-lapse aerial images of the East Loop 820 in Fort Worth, where it meets with Martin Luther King Jr. Freeway. This was a site of a prairie dog town that was there in around 1979. And horned lizards were there, and other prairie species. And of course, it's now just a business park. And the article on the left over here, there's a wanted ad. This is from the Brownsville, Texas Daily Herald from May of 1909. And it's a wanted ad, wanted 10,000 horned toads. So I gotta read this to you. A letter has been received by a Brownsville gentleman inquiring whether 10,000 horned toads can be cured at Brownsville. The rate at which this section has been cleared of brush for agricultural purposes of late has probably lessened the number of horned toads here, but the small boys might find it remunerative to devote part of their vacation to the task of enriching those that are left in order to supply this unusual demand. So even in 1909, they'd already, hidden within this wanted ad, basically information about how the agricultural development had already wiped out a lot of horned lizards. Right? Okay, and just an example from where I grew up. So this was house moved into in Texas City in Galveston County when I was 13 in 1993. And this was a few years before that, just some aerial Google Earth images there. And there was this kind of coastal prairie field in between the subdivision here and the subdivision that was already established over here. And by the time we moved in, it looked like this. The field was still there, and I was a teenager, and so my brother would go out there. He was about 10 years old, and he would go to this field, and there was some dirt bike trails and so forth, and he would play with his friends, and he found some horn lizards out there. He never told me about them, just told us a few years ago. And so I'm still mad at him. But I would go over, ride my bike down this road and go to my girlfriend's house over here when I was like 15. So I was passing up all the horn lizards and didn't know it. But by the early 2000s, it was developed as well, and you can see the cul-de-sac sitting there, built in, and there's a house there, and then basically all the grass and vegetation was removed by that time. And as far as I know, there's no horn lizards left anywhere east of I-35, essentially, anymore.
Good, how are you?
We'll get more to that in a minute. But this is what it looks like now.
Which do I want, that one or
And
that one?
so, mentioning all those exotic grasses earlier, Bermuda grass, buffalo grass, and they're going in this direction here. If you can read those species down here, but basically, I just pulled all this off of iNaturalist just earlier this month or last month. And you can see the distribution of where Bermuda grass is, and where Bahia grass is, and what's this one? Johnson grass, KR blue stem. I forgot to mention buffalo grass. I know for a fact that horn lizards have been displaced down there because of that. And let's see. I mentioned KR blue stem, St. Augustine grass, or this is St. Augustine cheatgrass, and Klein grass.
Out of them, we
So,
do have.
is it any wonder that a lot of prairie species are now missing from the eastern?
But yes,
half of Texas?
Do we have the other
When you look at- These are grasses that form monocultures and very dense, and they just don't play well with the natives.
What is smothered?
So when you look at the historical grasslands, Texas
Sauteed
over
and
here on
ground
the left,
Indian mushrooms, and they take rise, the others are not.
it was very vast. And essentially you only didn't have grasses in the grasslands and the piney woods and down in the South Texas plains, and then on a very kind of tight
Potatoes, we get one
area
side.
in the Trans-Pecos. And today, this is all, the turquoise that you see in this map over here is all that's left of those original grasslands. This is what it was like originally on the left. This is what it's like now on the right. And so this is some coastal prairie that's kind of over in the Galveston County area on the left. And that's kind of an obligate prairie species, the speckled king snake. It's in the picture there. And on the right is essentially what most of that looks like now. It's just Chinese tallow trees that are very mature, lots of them, and carpet grass in every yard. Usually St. Augustine or similar. All right. So and there's this kind of myth that's been going on that I've kind of been wanting to push back against a little bit. But there's these articles that have come out. These are 2 articles that I just took a screenshot of on my phone. But they all kind of have the same title. Lately, in the past couple of years, that Texas horn lizards are making a comeback. Well, I think it's a very hopeful way of looking at it, but I don't necessarily believe that there's any data that supports that right now. And I think when I read these articles, they usually just mention the zoos and Texas Parks and Wildlife breeding them in captivity and releasing them in places. And they've only done that really in a couple places, just a couple of ranches, really, one wildlife management area and one ranch, private ranch. And there's all this other part of Texas that that horn lizards are still declining, or they haven't recovered there yet. And so I'm hesitant to say that horn lizards are making a comeback, but I'm happy to see humans involved with this.
So the places that they were released, did a good portion live?
A good portion died. A good portion died. I mean, on some of the earliest ones, the ones that were translocated, the adults, like 55 out of 57 animals had died within 3 years on one of the translocated studies. As far as the ones that were bred in captivity at the zoos and then released, I don't know. I'm not sure, but I know that they've had in just the last year or two some that were released as babies and then survived to adulthood and then bred and had babies on their own. I think that's happened just in the last year or so.
Where is that?
The Mason Mountain Wildlife Management Area in Mason, Texas. So again, Mason.
Hill country. Huh?
Yeah. Yeah, in the hill country. And then the other private ranch is in Blanco County, where the San Antonio Zoo is releasing them. And they've had some success there with adult lizards that have grown up, that were released from babies just a few years ago, and have, I think recently in October, had an adult went onto a neighbor's property and that was found there. So they are spreading out in those areas.
If they were living in Texas City, what were they eating?
Harvester ants. Yeah, and I never really saw harvester ants growing up there, but they were already gone in the 80s by the time I was a kid. There might have been a few vacant lots. I think I did see some in vacant lots, but I don't think the acreage was enough to sustain horn lizards.
Is that their only one?
No, I'm going to show you a table that shows a lot of insects that they eat. And so, yeah, like I say, are they really making a comeback? Well, this is the self-proclaimed horn toad capital of Texas, Kennedy, Texas, down an hour south of San Marcos. And as of 2019 or so, I'm pretty sure horn lizards are extinct in the horn toad capital of Texas. And this is where we were doing some of my graduate school work around there. In 2017, I think the effective population was N equals 4. So we've got a lot of work to do. We're still hopeful, we're still very hopeful, but I think there's a lot of awareness that we need to be generating and a lot of work to do, especially from the native plant side of things. And so, getting back to where they used to be, so everything in the translucent pink is the historic range of Texas horn lizards, and all of the squares, the individual records that you can see there from museum collections. This is from the global, I forget what it's called, GBIF, Global Biodiversity something initiative or whatever, and then iNaturalist combined for those individual records. And then, you can see some people had in the 1940s had brought tons of horn lizards to a few places on beaches, and for some reason horn lizards survived on a few beaches in Florida and South Carolina, but they're not native here.
Well, I notice it's not, well, there is, I could see it here up in the Panhandle, which is where I'm from, and they were all over the place.
Yes.
So your map right before this didn't say that they were traditionally there, but that's a heavy grassland area.
Yeah, well,
Like Amarillo, Porter, Pampa.
you're talking about how this bare spots right here?
Nay, up in the Panhandle. Where is that?
Well, I think it's right here. Yeah. But maybe you can see it a little better on this one. But
Okay,
the turquoise dots are presence records, like they're there.
okay, got it.
And then the pink is the historic range. And so you can see that basically they're gone from most places east of I-35 now. And they used to extend into, parts of Louisiana even, and southwestern Missouri. Which that's really interesting because the Butterfield Overland Trail came down here, and that was a bison trace before it was the mail trail.
So that current list makes it look like there's a lot of them. There's a lot of blue area.
The trouble with that is scale. And so there's, for instance, Mason, Texas, where Fred Gibson was from, who wrote Old Yeller and everything. There's none in town there anymore, but there's some on the outskirts and some of the ranches there. And so it's just the size of the dots as an individual lizard, and that's basically the size of like several towns on the map there. But you just have to,
Now, when I was growing up in the 1940s and 50s in Fort Worth, they were all over the place. Very common. Do you know if do you know about them now?
In Fort Worth,
Yeah.
the closest that you can, I think, find horned lizards from Fort Worth is either 2.5 or 2 hours northwest up towards Wichita Falls in that area, or about 3 hours west now. So that's how far that they've receded from Fort Worth.
It hasn't been that long since I saw them in Dinosaur Valley State Park.
Yeah, and I think there's some, up until, maybe 20 years ago or so, there were still little bitty pockets of them in little places, with just a few individuals, and they would kind of wink out.
There's in a big field kind of just beside the river that's, kind of has the car loop around it.
There might still be some there. I hear whispers about that
I've
area
seen
over
there, it
there.
hasn't been, hasn't been that long since I've seen them. They
Yeah.
were pretty thick at Cleaver area when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Are they considered an indicator species of anything?
Horned lizards, I would
Yeah.
consider them an indicator species of healthy prairies that have a lot of keystone species going on. Because when you go to the extremes of their range, like say the Trans-Pecos, because they're really a prairie species, and so if you go into the extremes of their range, you see it's in the places that have prairie dogs and pronghorn, where you see the most reliable places to find horned lizards, and a bunch of other stuff too. Do I have a time limit or?
You're good.
You mentioned Mason, Texas. What was the name of that Mason Wildlife?
Mason Mountain Wildlife Management Area. Yeah. Yeah, they've done the Dallas Zoo, Fort Worth Zoo have done releases there, I believe. I know for sure Fort Worth Zoo has. And so this is just more of the same. This is data from Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. And all the green counties are places where they're biologists, and there's numbers in these counties, and that's just the number of biologists reporting whether they've seen horned lizards or not. All the green ones are places where they didn't see any horned lizards. And the tan ones are where only some of them saw horned lizards, and then the chocolate colored counties are the places where all the biologists saw horned lizards. So you can kind of see this kind of chipping away, in a westward direction of the receding range line.
Why are there some areas with no results? Is it all private land or like more private land? Or?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if there's just if they don't have biologists in those counties. I'm not sure why. That's a good question.
Well, up in the Panhandle, that's all private cattle country. You see in the white, and that's what just burned a lot of it. But that's all private, so there wouldn't be someone. That's all fenced off and whatever. So there may not be someone there viewing.
Yeah. I don't know if I could tell if Upton County out in the Trans-Pecos is that's white too, because I know that's a lot of private land as well. So maybe that is the reason. So were they ever here in Dallas?
Yes.
Yes, they were.
Yeah. And the data supports that too. So this is just this is a book that you get from Barnes and Noble, but it's Jim Dixon's book, who used to be a herpetologist at A&M on reptiles and amphibians in Texas, and it's just a dot distribution map really, but per county. It does show they were here, whereas you can see in the middle of the Blackline Prairie, as you all know. And if you zoom in on DFW in this part, this is from that GBIF distribution website, and it shows records, his museum and natural history collection records of horned lizards here. Of course, I've talked to people that have seen them, basically all of this over the years. But these are the ones that are in museums anyway. This is a book that was written by Ralph Axtell in 1996. It was called The Interpretive Atlas of Texas Lizards. And all it showed throughout the entire book was this kind of data, was every species of lizard and every county that it occurred, and even sometimes street addresses of where the lizards were found before they were recessioned into before they were, sometimes killed. And y'all know some of these places?
Oh, yeah.
River Lake Country Club, Turtle Creek, Turtle Circle, I think it is.
Turtle Creek.
Avalon Avenue.
Lakewood.
So yeah, and then this is the years that they were these animals were found. So it kind of ends in the mid 60s, 65 or so. And this is the museum or the university where it was housed.
I think they probably just had gone somewhere in West Texas and dropped some and brought them home.
That happens. And so what do I think is the hopeful solution for restoring horned lizards? Well, I think it does start with native plants. And this started for me in 2010 when I read this book right here. And because I had adults in my family who were telling me about all the horn, not only the horned lizards, but the box turtles and the rough green snakes. I was a hurt guy. You can't tell. And other critters, eastern glass lizards and all kinds of things that they were seeing basically in the same neighborhoods where I grew up, and I never saw. Just 25 years later, when I read this book, it was kind of like, oh, well, maybe we can use this concept to plant a species that supports that organism's food web and its habitat. And if you haven't read this book, I highly recommend it. Life-changing for me. Bringing Nature Home, How You Can Sustain Wildlife with Native Plants by Douglas Tallamy. And so a minute ago, I mentioned some of the most reliable places to find horned lizards in the extremes of their range is where you have the most keystone species. And so this is at the Nature Conservancy's grassland north of Marathon in Brewster County. And out there, I got out on Highway 385, out there in the distance, saw this pronghorn buck standing there, right? Really cool to see. And then in the foreground here is Prairie Dog Town. And just another view of the same thing here. Right? And then we're just on the other side of the barbed wire fence. And then when I look down on the ground, this is what I see. A horned lizard fecal pellet. And so I broke it open with my shoe, and you can see little pieces of ants in there, harvester ants, and beetles. There's actually a lot of beetle pieces in there. And so it just kind of brought it home to me that the more members of their historic community that you can get into an area, probably the better the habitat is, because they're providing ecosystem services for each other. And another one of those, like prairie dogs, is that's in the literature has been shown in Texas to provide preferential habitat for horned lizards. Texas horned lizards are pocket gophers. And and you can see these pocket gopher mounds here. Pocket gophers are becoming recognized as keystone species because they generate a lot of biodiversity by the forbs, the roots of the forbs that they eat, and so they create a lot of little bare areas everywhere, very loose soil and so forth, where grasshoppers can lay their eggs and other things can lay their eggs, like horned lizards and box turtles. And but yeah, just in the past, let's say 5 or 6 years, there was a paper that showed, basically proved that horned lizards live in pocket gopher communities more than they do off pocket gopher communities, wherever they're around. And this was a paper that just not a paper, just a little natural history note that I submitted along with my old advisor at TCU, Dean Williams, to the herpetological review, and it just got accepted like last week or so. But it's just a note describing an observation we made of a dung beetle down in Karnes County, Texas, that was pushing a horned lizard scat. And this was kind of like mind-blowing for me after a few years later when I started learning a little bit more about what dung beetles do and the ecosystem services they provide. They essentially create seed balls from the dung. Right?
Have you read the kids' book about it?
No.
It's like Harold the Dung Beetle.
Okay. Yeah, and because it's so fertile, right? And then even if the seeds aren't already in the dung, they can stick to the dung as they're rolling it around, and then also they suppress parasites, because they're cleaning up, you know, the poop. And if you're not coming into contact with your own feces, you know, especially if you're, you know, domesticated livestock, then you really don't have a need for dewormers. And then they recycle nutrients and all this kind of thing, or recycle nutrients. And so I started thinking, wow, like, so horned lizards, they eat large harvester ants preferentially that carry seeds all the time. And so obviously those seeds are going to get ingested, and then they also eat these dung beetles. And so if they eat the ants that are carrying the seeds, and then dung beetles pushing around the seeds that the harvester ants prefer, well, then the dung beetles are essentially cultivating the prairie grasses that the harvester ants prefer that the horned lizards eat. Now, none of this has been proven. This is just me, like, just kind of going crazy in my mind, but about the possible implications. But okay, so. And of course, I think just getting the plants right is something that we have to focus on now, and throughout Texas. And Texas is 93% privately owned, at least, and so, you know, we know that nature in Texas tends to select for perennials, and so perennials, they tend to want to stay put. They don't invest a lot in horizontal spread, as you know. They have really deep roots, but man likes to select annuals because it's easier to manipulate, get seeds from quickly, you know, a quicker return on investment, so forth. But you know, turf grasses have very shallow roots, as you know, but because of the way that they spread around, they don't allow the small things like roadrunners and quails and horned lizards and box turtles and stuff to actually move around, because there's no interstitial bare ground in between those turf grasses, unlike the perennial prairie grasses. Okay, so why else are native prairie grasses important for Texas horned lizards? One reason is camouflage. And so horned lizards, there's a couple that here, I don't know if you can see them in the photos. There's a horned lizard here, and there's one right here. And this one's from a place that has red soil in South Texas, and this one's from a place that has the gumbo, the charcoal gray stuff. And so there's a red horned lizard here and a gray horned lizard here. And that's basically, that was my research that I did for my thesis in grad school. And, you know, out in the Davis Mountains and so forth, and Alpine and everything, we have brown soil, they're brown, and, you know, and so you have.
Is that the same species? Or
that's the same species, yes.
They can change color.
Well, yes, but they don't do it like a chameleon. They're born this color. Okay. Because they're the parents that get eaten by birds and so forth, visual predators, the ones that don't match would get eaten. And so eventually, just by natural selection, you end up looking like whatever soil. And that's their first line of defense, is camouflage. As you know, they don't run very fast. They can't run up trees or fence posts like Texas spiny lizards can. They just sit there and try to look like the prairie that they were made from. All right. And another aspect of their color matching that, and the reason why you need prairie grasses for this is because it has the bare ground in between the root crowns of the bunch grasses. And you can't have the dense carpets and turfs and so forth. Another aspect of their camouflage is this ubiquitous white stripe that runs down the length of their back. And it mimics the sun-bleached grass stems that fall to the ground that become the thatch. And this one, and other reptiles are known to do this, where they will angle their body if they sense a predator is near, to if the pattern of the surrounding debris and so forth is going one direction, and they have a stripe on their back, they will go with that direction. And I think this one was doing that, and I was standing right above it taking a photograph. And you can see the curvature of its stripe on its back is like matches the curve of that little grass blade right there. I don't know, but I can't prove it. But yeah. All right, so I'm sure many of you already know some bunch grasses that are like that don't impede movement of small terrestrial vertebrates, and that provide seed for birds and harvester ants, and provide cover and from shade and predators. And these are some of the ones that I think are kind of well known. This is Texas cupgrass over here, little blue stem, and tabosa grass, which is kind of more of a panhandle grass, I think. And of course, bunch grass is important for other grassland species. So, bobwhite quail like to nest in those bunch grasses. And, and really, you need a mosaic of grassland types within just mere feet of each other to make good horned lizard habitat. And so, some recent research from TCU shows that alleyways in some of these small Texas towns where horned lizards still exist mimic the habitat requirements of horned lizards, because in the middle of the path, you got this, trodden, mown areas where the horned lizards can come out and bask, and they can look for food, and they can camouflage against the soil from predators and so forth. And then if it gets too hot, which it does about 5 hours out of every day, lethal temperatures for horned lizards if they don't have shade nearby. As long as you do have some weeds that grow along the fence line and so forth, then horned lizard habitat is pretty good in those alleyways. And that's essentially what you have here on the right. This is at the Rolling Plains Quail Research Ranch in Fisher County. Really good habitat. Lindsay and I found a horned lizard there last May on this little path here. But essentially short plants in this middle of this little dirt path here, and then on the berms on either side you got taller plants, cacti, taller grasses, and then a tree about every 60 feet or so apart from each other. Good horned lizard habitat. All right, so someone asked about horned lizard food earlier. There's 35 different kinds, different families, I think, of insects that were. This is just from one study, again from another researcher at TCU, Rachel Alenius. But there are several varieties of ants. Big-headed ants came out on top for the most ants in all. I think she looked at 133 different fecal samples, and then harvester termites, which actually provided the most calories for horned lizards. And then harvester ants, and then several other different kinds of ant species. You got true bugs in here. You've got, you got spiders even. There's acrobat ants, velvet ants, earwigs even, dung beetles. There were something like 57 individual dung beetles in there. So they eat a lot more. They're generalists. Well, they're specialists, but they generalize as opportunities arise on any insects really that they can eat.
So they'll basically eat anything that's small enough.
Yes, that's an insect, and but they're kind of designed bodily and behaviorally to eat ants and termites, any kind of trail foraging insect, because they're just kind of a sit and wait predator. And they got that really round body, just like a cow does, or a whale or anything that eats like low nutrient food all day long. They have to eat a lot of it, and so that's why they have that round body, so they can eat ants all day long, or at least for a good portion of the day. So I don't know if I can play this from here.
Let's try it.
Let's see. Okay. This is a little baby horned lizard about this big, and it's eating little bitty. Fight it. This is pretty exciting. The first time I ever saw a baby horned lizard eat, and this was in an alleyway in Karn City.
What is their lifespan?
I would say most of them probably survive to adulthood, but then the ones that do, probably 2 to 3 years. I think the record is about 8 years. Probably captive animals, the ones that live that long.
That's how they find them. They're sitting on the ant beds in the, the red ants in the ground. They would sit at the perimeter of them, and you could always find them there.
Yeah.
I didn't think about that. I mean, I know they were eating them, but that's brilliant.
Well, Yeah, it's like the I Love Lucy episode where she's eating the chocolates. You know?
Because those ant mounds they cover a huge amount of ground. Yeah. Anyway, interesting.
They probably would eat fire ants. I know there were fire ants listed. I don't know if it was the Invicta species, the imported fire ants on that table there a minute ago. But fire ants attack so much. I think that the babies also have less keratin in their scales and in their horns and stuff. When they're babies, they're a lot softer. They're like little chicken nuggets out there. And but the adults, I think, probably a little bit more protected. So where there's fire ants, yeah, I think it's hard a lot of times for babies to make a living. Okay, and this is just showing, if you haven't seen harvester ants, you can see this is a field of curly mesquite. They harvest the seed from that, but and that's our Bill Neiman talking in the back. They're carrying curly mesquite seeds.
Do with those seeds? Take them in their nest.
They're covered.
Yeah, they're taking the nest and they and then this is those harvester termites I was telling you about. This is also a Native American seed. These are only in the southern half of Texas, but they're, like I said, calorie-wise, they're the most important food item, at least in Karnes County, for the horned lizards there. But these are protected. The guards have this nozzle, and they spray it at ants. There's some kind of noxious fluid that they spray at ants. But they don't have as much chitin in their exoskeleton as ants do, I don't think. They're soft-bodied and they have more calories. One of those can get on them. They're really nutritious. And these are eating the fallen stem of eastern gamma grass. There are horned lizards there at the farm, Native American seed. All right, so are there grasses that harvester ants and harvester termites prefer? Well, I think harvester ants are kind of generalists when it comes to seeds. They'll take anything from practically anywhere in the world. But there are certain grasses that they do seem to have been noted carrying, and ones that grow around their ant bed. There's some purple threons growing up here and around here, around this harvester ant bed, and it's earned the nickname ant rice because of this trait. And grommas, which I think if you're going to do landscaping in a yard where you want to have horned lizards, where you can't do controlled burns and you don't have grazing, I think grommas are great for the short grass areas because they're all practically short, except for, side oats can get a little bit taller, but Texas gromma is a real short one, under a foot tall. Same with blue gromma. Side oats here in the middle. All of these have been seen carried off by harvester ants. And then also another type of plant that you need to think about when it comes to, and this is another thing, ant conservation. Nobody ever talks about ant conservation or ant restoration. But we have to think about that if we're going to restore horned lizards, because the baby horned lizards don't eat the big harvester ants. They're not big enough to. They're about the size of a harvester ant themselves. And so they're eating all of those little big-headed ants, Phytoli, acrobat ants, chromatogaster, things like that. And one of the things that we know about ants, at least a lot of the ants in the tallgrass prairie, is that they harvest honeydew from aphids. And so if you can use milkweeds or some other plant that you know about that aphids love, that can help bring about some ant diversity, because they seem to always be attended by aphids. And there's three basic other kinds of plants, wildflowers, that I think could be important for horned lizard restoration or ant restoration. And some of those are keystones like solidago, goldenrod, Those seem to be powerhouses for all kinds of native insect support, including ants. And then plants that have eliosomes on their seeds, these little oily appendages that are on the outside of the seeds that ants carry off to feed to their larvae, and then once the larvae eat those, they discard the seeds, but the seeds end up being protected. And so they tend to grow. This is a scrambled eggs, Corydalis. And I saw my first one just the other day at UNT because somebody posted it on iNaturals, so I rushed over there to go see it, and it was growing out of a crack in some bricks like near a sidewalk. There was no soil around anywhere, and I was just, people are wondering on iNaturals like how it got there, and I was thinking, oh, I wonder if ants took the seeds into the cracks. And this is the one photo that we have of Corydalis on that Native American seed on the website, and it's growing out of a crack. It was like in the sidewalk setup.
Do you know which Corydalis that is?
I think this is Curvis. I don't know how to pronounce the Latin name, but, and I don't even know if it has a common name. But anyway, and then plants that have extrafloral nectaries. So partridge pea, ants love those. Really what we need to do, and I'd be interested in talking with any of you who are academics and you want to do a research paper together. What are the native plants in Texas that have eliosomes, extrafloral nectaries, and support things like aphids and other honeydew-producing insects? That would be a helpful paper out there for restorationists. And just using the same concept as the bunch grasses, we could select for certain wildflowers that kind of form these like basketball-sized clumps that attract insects. Also, some of them that are pokey that attract insects, like prickly poppy can be pretty good for protecting some of the babies, for instance, from coyotes, and they don't want to get poked by a pokey plant.
What about Texas thistle or any of the native thistles?
What about it?
Like would that be good for protection? Because they have that rosette, they're biennials, so that's the rosette that they can kind of hide under, and then I know they attract a bunch of ants.
Yeah. Okay.
They
Yeah, I
tend
would
to
think
have
so.
more of an upright form though, instead of that
Yeah.
shape.
Yeah. And so I guess I was thinking of, I think all of it's good because ants also eat other things like caterpillars, and they eat other insects. And so it's not just the things that they benefit from directly, like extrafloral nectaries and eliosomes. Any kind of plants that can bring around insects is probably good for ants. And then as far as trees, I think it would be good to focus on natives, and ones that tend to bring around a lot of insects, like Eve's necklace, down in South Texas, anaqua trees. Those have been, harvest ants have been seen carrying the fruits of those. And then just basically keeping them spread out about as far apart as baseball players in a baseball diamond. And you don't want it to become a woodland, for horn lizards. You want it to be more of somewhere between a savanna and a open prairie. Okay, and so just this past year, at Native American Seed, one of the first things I wanted to do was create a seed mix for horn lizards using some of the principles in this, a commercially available seed mix. And this, as far as I know, is the first commercially available seed mix for a native plant seed mix for a reptile. And I'd be happy to be wrong. But, and it's not perfect. It's not going to be perfect everywhere, because people are going to be buying it all over the state. But not every single thing that's in there is going to be native to that county and so forth. But it's a heck of a lot better than Bermuda grass and a lot of this other options, right? So we're not looking for something perfect right now, just something good. And so this is what a yard looks like. I know you guys have been talking a while, but this is what a yard looks like that has horn lizards in it. This is an alpine, and there's a lot of shorter grasses in the middle here in the walking areas, like some grommas and stuff, and a lot of bare ground for the horn lizards to get around. And then to me it's not a manicured looking place, but it's beautiful, and it's got some agaves, and it's well landscaped, I think, and it's ecologically functional. The harvester ants are happy, the horn lizards are happy there. And one thing I've noticed going out and doing these surveys for horn lizards with TCU is that whenever we saw babies, they would often be hanging out around dirt mounds. And I think the mothers would lay their eggs in these loose soil piles, almost like a pitcher's mound kind of situations. This was at the same yard that I showed you earlier in Alpine over here. And there's this mound of dirt here, and I saw some of these half-moon shaped little dugouts where horned lizards had dug into the soil there, and probably females had laid their eggs in there, and it's got prickly pear on top. And I think they like that. So if you do have some dirt piles from whatever, I think we can use that to landscape them beautifully with the plants that support horned lizards' habitat and their food web. That's just kind of what we're trying to show over here on the right with some drawn in milkweeds and bluestones and brahmas and so forth. This is another yard in Karnes County that had horse herb in the shady areas of the yard, and actually throughout most of the yard. And they mowed it regularly. It had harvester ants in there. Horned lizards were able to get in through all the bare ground areas there and crawl around. And there were dozens of horned lizards in that yard. Right next door, though, over here, they have St. Augustine grass, just a thick carpet. We never got the survey over there, but I was always looking and never saw any horned lizards hanging out over there. And
So if they mowed this, is that not a danger to horned toads?
Yeah, and we did find horned lizards that have their limbs missing in some cases, or a horn missing, you know. But gosh, they're mighty tough. And but yeah, it is, and I think you have to if you are going to mow, you got to do it when they're not active, which usually is in the hottest part of the day, which you got to convince people to do that. But yeah. So anyway, as far as how else we can kind of rewild the habitat of horned lizards, basically supporting and getting involved with efforts to rewild those other keystone species. These are some of the ones that are going on right now. The Texas Lobo Coalition that Katie mentioned before, the Texas Tribal Buffalo Project, the Prairie Dog Coalition. All of these are keystone species that kind of build horned lizard habitat free of charge whenever they're allowed to exist. And so there's also the Horned Lizard Conservation Society. We're going to learn specifically about horned lizards and their conservation. But that's what I got. Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
How far do they range, or do they roam?
An individual, or
Yes.
Yeah, about maybe an acre, an individual. But you need about 300 individuals to start a population, and so you need about 300 acres or so, theoretically. Because otherwise you're going to have too much inbreeding and so forth.
So you know the story of old Rip in Eastland?
Yes.
And how many years did he live?
Right. What, 30 or something like that? Yeah.
I have little ceramic old Rips that I have about 3 or 4 of them. And it has if you get one, it has a little documentation tucked into it.
Yes, I've got one too.
Okay.
My friend Melissa back there gave me one. Yes.
So this area is east of I-35. And we live on a smallish lot and trying to eradicate the St. Augustine Bermuda grass that we had there when we first, at first. And but if you create this habitat, but it's not an acre, it's just a front yard. How realistic is it to try to create a habitat when your neighbors all around you aren't going to do it?
Yeah, it's a good question.
You gotta start somewhere. Yeah, you gotta start somewhere.
And not the ants, I don't think, but the aphids and a number of those plants you mentioned, we spark those in, but who's eating them? Who's eating them off of them? How do I create, with just a few of these lizards living in my house?
Well,
I think they can, but you have to have the habitat right first. And there's other things too that I just don't have time to talk about. But I think you've probably seen wildlife overpasses being built in the news. There's one in San Antonio. I think those are going to have to be so common in the future that that you can look out any window and see one in order to make all this work. And I mean all of it work. I mean like the whole rewilding thing, you know, living alongside wildlife. I think we're going to have to like really just change as humans for that to occur. And you know, I think native seed in the future, native seed depots are going to be as common as gas stations everywhere. And this is my, you know, yeah.
So if I created a habitat, you know, I was saying about that, you know, there's a lot of different plants that I've introduced and they matured and they put out seed, but no one's eating them. No one's eating the seed, you know, last year's rudbeckia was sat there all winter, nobody came in, you know. So how do I bring in the animals in the middle of, you know, Richardson?
Well, so, you know, we've got the zoos working on breeding them right now, and they're bringing them, you know, until we get some wildlife overpasses that are going over I-35 and so forth, you know, that's how we're going to have to bring them in. And there is talks with different entities to release some, and there's other, not just the zoos, but there's nature centers and other places that are starting to breed them and so forth, because Texans love these, and I think they're a really good tool for restoration in general. And I think it will happen. I think people are going to continue to kind of awaken to this kind of awareness and keep doing the work and keep spreading the word. But it's just going to, it might be several generations from now before we see that horned lizards where they were before 50 years ago.
And it's hard, if you do it in your yard, then you need to get the neighbors to do it in their yard, because, you know, your neighbors are using pesticides and fertilizers and all of that, so, you know, if you're isolated, you have to get everybody else to do it.
But check the alleys, there is stuff going on, because that's always the least maintained.
Yeah.
But still, even if it's just your yard, you might not have a habitat for horned lizards, but you might have a habitat for a lot of other things. You know, bees, butterflies, various
Baby steps.
And it takes more than 1 year for a species to find your habitat that's brand new. It's gonna take, you know, maybe a couple of years. So it's not an overnight thing. And
I just want to know that I'm not just spitting in the wind.
You're not, you're not. You know, we're trying to undo like 200 years of social customs, and so it's gonna take not just overnight to kind of fix some things. It's a process, we'll get there.
You know, Bill Neiman, he's always talking about how decisions that Native Americans made about any decision they made about the landscape, anything that they were going to do, how it was going to affect 7 generations out. Not, you know, the next quarterly statement, you know, but how it was going to affect their descendants 7 generations out. And so I think we have to have that kind of.
It's something that each of us can do is we can reach out to our elected representatives and try to get some of these codes that require basically St. Augustine kind of yards, reach out, say that this is bad for the environment, at least allow those of us who want to do this to do that. The next step might be the mandate, but let's start with the allow. And
send them to TJ too.
You know, the more of us that do that, the more chance we have of going the direction we hope to go. And I know I've helped get people elected that have those kind of policies.
Yeah, and not to pick on my friend Melissa here, she's back there with the horned lizard hat. She's she's a horned lizard artist. You probably met her at the state fair and the Fort Worth Stock Show and Rodeo, at the horned lizard booth that they sell the horned lizard art and so forth. But I forgot what I was going to say about you.
Obviously, it's white. And I was in the state of Guanajuato, San Miguel, de Allende, and they have a botanical center. I saw trails of ants like to come out and spotted little toads, I have a photo in my cell phone you can look at. But that toad doesn't live that far down in Mexico, does it?
It's the, which one? The,
I was it's north of Mexico City.
San Miguel de Allende, with a lot.
okay.
Ventura.
But it's the native horned lizard down there? Okay, yeah, the Texas horned lizard is not gonna go down that far. The Texas horned lizard is gonna go down to northern Mexico, like Chihuahua, Coahuila, Durango, maybe Zacatecas. Yeah.
Spring breaking, I don't know.
So, just an interesting anecdote, about 10, 15 years ago, I was working in an office building in Plano, and it was a big building, and there was a horny toad there. And when you were walking to the cafeteria, you could see him sunning himself on the windowsill. He was famous in that building. And they had some foundation problems. They had to take the vegetation off and do something with the foundation. I think they tried to rehome him while that work was going on. That was a very good little treat for us all.
Yeah.
If you have Texas flying lizards and other lizards, is that an indicator?
Yeah, are there
that you're doing
indicators?
something?
I think it's an indicator that you've got good insects. I think they're poor indicators for prairie health though, because Texas spiny lizards aren't really prairie species there. I think their numbers have increased in urban environments because of all the trees that we've planted in the urban areas. Along with other species like raccoons, Texas rat snakes have probably increased. The ones that get in your attic and eat your rats and stuff.
I mean,
Yeah, what are
hey,
the worst
can I hire
predators for horned lizards?
I would say the worst, well,
Or I guess the,
yeah, I would say the ones that you have to worry about now, actually raccoons. So one of the few instances I know about of somebody doing management on their land for prairie restoration and horned lizards coming back onto the land on their own was Professor David Hillis, who's a UT professor. He also lives in Mason. We've been talking about Mason a lot, but he has the Double Helix Ranch in Mason. He's a DNA guy, Double Helix. But he killed off, he just had a hunch that we basically suppressed raccoons predators. We don't really have any top tier predators in Texas anymore. And then also just all the trees in the urban areas, raccoons are kind of superficial. Their numbers are really high compared to historically. And then the raccoon pelt trade kind of died in the 1970s. He had a hunch that if he killed off all the raccoons that he was seeing, also deer corn feeds a lot of raccoons too. If he killed off the raccoons on his property, that horned lizards and other prairie species might come back. And he's had that happen in the last, I think, 10 years. He's got a book out actually about doing all this with UT Press. I think it's called From Armadillos to Sisyphus or something like that. So I think raccoons, coyotes, actually, so the reason that horned lizards squirt blood out of their eyes is because of canids, wild canids. So foxes, coyotes. And I mean, that's a lot of evolutionary pressure to squirt blood out of your eyes. They must have been eating a lot of horned lizards throughout the thousands of years or millions of years. But yes, also roadrunners, raptors. But yeah, I think some of the more worrisome ones nowadays are probably coyotes because they don't have natural predators, and feral hogs. Feral hogs are probably really bad.
House cats.
Cats too, house cats.
any other questions?
How many people raise their head has seen one in real life?
They were common when I was a kid.
Long time ago.
Yeah, you got to go out west now if you want to see them, or to the Panhandle, or pretty much west or south, far south.
How far west is their range?
To all the way to about Portal, Arizona.
Okay.
So just barely into southeastern Arizona.
Okay.
and into southeastern Colorado, panhandle of Oklahoma.
So Chihuahuan deserts are not Sonora deserts.
Not Sonora deserts. And in the grasslands within those deserts.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Don't forget, we have some free plants over here on the table, and if you're supplying plants for plant sale, we have spare pots outside the door.
Yes, yes. They're bringing plants. Thank you all for coming. And then if you want to join us for Mexican food, we'll meet at Sophia y